I am an unabashed fan of Green Lantern, since I was a kid, of which one? All of them, honestly, but mostly Kyle Hallen John, but also lately Joe Mullane. But the movie? The movie was... it was, as I remember, it was a film that wasn't great, but I recently decided, because it's on Netflix, I needed to watch it again because I felt like it was worth doing. A little retrospective review. So this week I'm looking at Green Lantern, the legacy of a motion picture 10 years later. I'm Dan Umpton, and this is the Doomcast. Green Lantern, released in June of 2011, I recently went back and watched it again. But does it hold up? Is it actually better than we were giving it credit for at the time? Nope. Okay, but seriously, it's not a great movie, but it did have long-term impacts on the careers of a lot of people involved, and the comic adaptation industry. Not quite in the way that you might think. I mean, from the jump, by rights, at the time that this movie came out, it should have cleaned up at the box office. Aside from the fact that this had a hugely powerful cast, including Ryan Reynolds, Blake Lively, Taika Waititi, Mark Strong, Peter Sarsgaard, and Tim Robbins, even Angela Bassett as Amanda Waller. Crazy! But in 2011, Green Lantern as a character in comics was huge. Unstoppable, even. Following Jeff Johns' immensely popular revival of Hal Jordan and the immensely popular Blackest Night event, it's hard to understand how big Green Lantern was in 2011 in comics still. It was at this point probably about as popular as Batman or Superman, and the sales were showing it, but DC had just created the immensely unpopular New 52, and the box office reception of the Green Lantern movie literally halted the momentum of the character's popularity nearly immediately. Now, that's not to say that Green Lantern disappeared from the map all of a sudden, or that this was the only factor in a decline of popularity. There had been creative team shifts, and of course that launch of the New 52, but all in all, it just wasn't quite as popular as it had been before. The thing about the Green Lantern movie itself is that there isn't a specific thing or things that it did wrong on the whole, it's that it didn't do much quite right. In retrospect, it was the precursor to the now standard plaguing tropes of comic book film origin stories and DC films quite frequently on the whole. An unnecessarily reimagined look to the hero, an overly long film, a very drawn-out origin story and first act, too many villains entirely, a shaky, messy third act where everything is surrounded in smoke and fire for the most part. Hal Jordan is a test pilot for military aircraft contractor Ferris Air, just like his father who had died tragically in a plane crash. Carol, his obligatory paramour, is the heiress to the company, and he gets a ring from an alien that gives him the power of first act exposition on Oa, and also the ability to project constructs made of his will. Hector Hammond, a crackpot scientist and the son of a senator, frequently the same things, as we all know, gets some the little bit of blood or alien goo from Parallax that was in the blood of Abin Sur when he examines the body, and he gets a massively huge psychic brain and ends up a corny throwaway villain. Parallax shows up in Coast City, kills Hector Hammond, and Hal Jordan throws Parallax into the sun through a sheer force of will, and the mid-credits scene shows Sinestro Sinestroing. It was honestly not even the worst DC movie ever made, or the worst comic book film ever made by a long shot, but it did suffer from the lack of focus that has sort of come to define superhero film as a genre. The same jingoism, the same mistakes repeated by successor films scores over. If anything, it was guilty primarily of giving fans, or attempting to give fans, too much of what they expected without reinventing any portion of it, at least the critical parts of a story. Too many villains, too much story, yada, yada, yada. And it ended up boring. But it's also astonishing to look at where the cast is now, 10 years out. Taika Waititi has directed one of the biggest Marvel films of all time, in addition to his offbeat comedies becoming much more mainstream successes and adapted even to television. Ryan Reynolds reprised his Deadpool role and became a phenomenon. He's also continued to raise his own star profile, as well as build a pretty highly successful gin brand. And he and Taika also most recently co-starred in Free Guy, an amazing film that is almost the antithesis of superhero film, subtly pro-working class and anti-capitalist, and surprisingly very fun, despite what you may have heard. Also, Blake Lively married Ryan Reynolds. Peter Sarsgaard became a successful character actor. Tim Robbins remains the guy from Hudsucker Proxy, and Angela Bassett is still incredibly, inexplicably hot. I think the thing that we forgot about comic book film as a genre, once Nolan's Batman film trilogy rapidly raised the profile of superhero movies in general and started becoming mistaken for art films in the mid-2000s, is that up until 2011, Green Lantern was pretty much just what blockbuster superhero movies were in general. The Joel Schumacher Batmans were gonna pretend that those were superior to this movie. If anything, Green Lantern is merely mediocre as a film and pretty average as a superhero film as well. It could have been massively improved, no doubt. It could have been a much better movie. But so could any number of early Marvel films like Thor, or DCEU films like Batman vs. Superman. But Green Lantern was enough to slow the popularity of a character in its own major moment. But it also ended up being a good thing that studios seemed to learn from, and the careers of many involved ended up benefiting in the long run. Thanks everybody for watching. This has been the Doomcast. We'll see you next week.